Hello, everyone, and welcome to Novara Live. I am Dalia Gebrial, and I am joined by Novara Babe-in-Chief, Stephen Methven. Stephen, how are you doing?
Hello, Dalia. Very nice to be here with you on a sunny Thursday evening, although I wouldn't really know it because all the blinds are closed in this studio. How are you?
I'm good. Second week in a row with you. I'm a lucky, lucky girl. Coming up tonight, Elon Musk is formally stepping down. Israel is annexing new swathes of the West Bank. And we have got Robert Jenrick running scared from the streets of London. So make sure you stay tuned for all of that. And as ever, if you'd like to support our work, you can sign up at novaramedia.com/support and make sure to let us know your comments in the YouTube chat, or you can tweet at us on the hashtag Novara Live. US President Donald Trump's big economic idea was to reindustrialize the US by punishing countries for making goods that Americans want to import. Now, it was never completely clear how that was supposed to work, but now the question is, at least temporarily, pretty philosophical. That's because most of Trump's Liberation Day tariffs have been slapped down by a federal court charged with overseeing US international trade. Now, the court's ruling doesn't apply to all of Trump's tariffs, but it does apply to most of them. And that's because the president signed executive orders putting them in place by invoking a piece of emergency legislation. Back in April, Trump used a 1977 law called the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, or IEEPA, to place what his administration called reciprocal tariffs on exports to the US from almost every country in the world. There was a blanket 10% tariff on countries like the UK, where the US has a trade surplus, and there were larger tariffs on those countries and blocs that the US has a trade deficit with. Earlier, Trump had also placed tariffs on Mexico and Canada. And to do all this, Trump had argued that the IEEPA gave the president sweeping powers to change the US's trade relations with its partners. And the IEEPA does give him those powers in emergencies. So what did Trump do? He simply declared a number of national emergencies. He put tariffs on Mexico, Canada, and some on China on the basis of what he called a fentanyl and immigration emergency. And he put tariffs on the world at large by claiming that the US's trade deficit, which it's run every year for nearly half a century, was also a national emergency. Most of those tariffs have now been paused after they created market turmoil, but were set to kick in again in July. But that may never happen, after the court essentially ruled that Trump misused the law because the tariffs don't, quote, deal with an unusual and extraordinary threat directly. Instead, they were being used to blackmail other countries into dealing with those threats. In its ruling, the court said this: the president's assertion of tariff-making authority exceeds any tariff authority delegated to the president under IEEPA. IEEPA does not authorize any of the worldwide retaliatory or trafficking tariff orders. The challenged tariff orders will be vacated and their operation permanently enjoined. The ruling leaves some tariffs in place, namely those where the IEEPA wasn't used. So tariffs on steel, cars, and aluminium aren't affected by the ruling. Responding to the judgment, a White House spokesperson said this: foreign countries' non-reciprocal treatment of the United States has fueled America's historic and persistent trade deficits. These deficits have created a national emergency that has decimated American communities, left our workers behind, and weakened our defense industrial base, facts that the court did not dispute. It is not for unelected judges to decide how to properly address a national emergency. President Trump pledged to put America first, and the administration is committed to using every lever of executive power to address this crisis and restore American greatness. The Justice Department has already filed an appeal against the ruling, meaning the case could ultimately end up in the Supreme Court. Trump hasn't so far commented on the ruling, but he did post this on Truth Social last night. So it says, he's on a mission from God and nothing can stop what is coming. So what are the political and economic consequences of this ruling? Well, the stock market is loving it. All the US indexes opened up this morning, though traders are likely to be cautious over the administration's next steps. And there are still other options open to the president, such as trying to reimpose the tariffs using other legal approaches. But the damage to Trump's authority may already be mortal. At a press briefing in the White House last night, a journalist asked a pretty challenging question.
Mr. President, Wall Street analysts have coined a new term called the taco trade. They're saying Trump always chickens out on your tariff threats, and that's why markets are higher this week. What's your response to that?
I kick out?
Chicken out.
Oh, isn't that nice? Chicken out. I've never heard that. You mean because I reduced China from 145% that I set down to 100 and then down to another number? And I said you have to open up your whole country. And because I gave the European Union a 50% tax tariff, and they called up and they said, please, let's meet right now. Please, let's meet right now. And I said, okay, I'll give you till July 9. I actually asked them, I said, what's the date? Because they weren't willing to meet. And after I did what I did, they said, we'll meet anytime you want. And we have an end date of July 9th. You call that chickening out? Because we have $14 trillion now invested, committed to investing when Biden didn't have practically anything. This country was dying. You know, we have the hottest country anywhere in the world. I went to Saudi Arabia. The king told me, he said, we have the hottest country in the world right now. 6 months ago, this country was stone cold dead. We had a dead country. We had a country people didn't think it was going to survive, and you ask a nasty question like that. It's called negotiation. You set a number. And if you go down, if I set a number at a ridiculous high number and I go down a little bit, they want me to hold that number, 145% tariff. Even I said, man, that really got up. You know how it got? Because of fentanyl and many other things, and you added it up. I said, where are we now? We're at 145%. I said, whoa, that's high. That's high. They were doing no business whatsoever, and they were having a lot of problems. We were very nice to China. I don't know if they're going to be nice to us, but we were very nice to China. And in many ways, I think we really helped China tremendously because, they were having great difficulty because we were basically going cold turkey with China. We were doing no business because of the tariff, because it was so high. But I knew that. But don't ever say what you said. That's a nasty question.
I always find it really hard to just follow his train of thought. It's like being on a roller coaster. But one thing I would say about this before I throw over to Stephen is, look, I think it's probably a good thing that the courts in the US are still somewhat functional. We have seen over the past 6 months or so, the court orders being ignored, But I would say that I do worry a little bit about this kind of primarily legalistic way or procedural or bureaucratic way of trying to tackle some of these extremes that are coming out of the Trump administration. Because essentially, Trump can't just be railed in by bureaucratic measures. There also has to be a political movement. And it's the absence of that political opposition that is really worrying me, because sometimes with these kind of far-right populists, when they pick these fights with the courts, fights that they actually kind of know that they're going to lose. I'm sure Trump had legal advice before he implemented these tariffs and knew that there was a good chance that the courts would oppose him. Sometimes that's exactly what they want. They want to pick these very kind of simplistic or mediatized battles with the court to then lower public confidence, lower public opinion of those courts, and therefore kind of dismantle some of the court's legitimacy. And also when the charge against someone like Trump is, oh, well, you're breaking the rules, then what they can sort of turn around and say as right-wing populists is, well, then we just need to change the rules because the rules are getting in the way of me putting America first. So yes, we do want to see that the courts can still do something to curb some of these excesses, but at the same time, that's not a replacement for political opposition, which is really lacking at the moment. Stephen, what do you make of these latest developments from the courts?
Well, first of all, I want to just take a minute for Taco, which I think is a genius and really got under his skin, which I enjoyed seeing. But actually, what you said on the courts, I agree with completely. Look, as everybody knows, there are three branches to American government. There's the legislative, the executive, and the judiciary. And in that statement from the White House, what you're seeing, and also in many of Trump's actions, is you're seeing a rebalancing or an attempt to rebalance the distribution of powers between those three branches of the government. And the courts, in a way, are always the easiest to tackle because they can't really answer back. Congress is much harder because obviously there's a lot of people in it who have, obviously in the two parties, but who have a lot of different views, even from within the parties that they represent. But the point of the judiciary is to oversee excesses of powers on the part of the executive, and also to carry out, judge or rule on whether or not laws passed by Congress have been passed. But I think what you say at the moment is like so right. It's so easy to, if you're in the business of attacking the structure of the liberal state and getting a wave of populist sentiment behind you in your attempt to attack the structure of the liberal state because you blame that structure for keeping things static, for stopping things from improving, for keeping people poor, then of course the court does you a favor by ruling against you when you try to breach the executive power that you have. And I mean, I was looking at the ruling today, and I think that it is totally right about, the stitch up that's been done here with the declaring of emergencies and then federal emergencies, and then using tariffs as a way to tackle those emergencies, which are in some sense really made up. Like, the deficit is not an emergency; it's been going on for half a century. Fentanyl is an emergency, although it is one that's improving in the US. And immigration is or isn't an emergency. Well, it's certainly not an emergency. It is or isn't an issue, depending on your view. So, the mechanism here was to create these emergencies so that the law could then be applied, granting Trump these extra powers to impose the tariffs. And the court's been very clear that they actually don't consider those to be emergencies. And if they were emergencies, none of the tariffs are, in fact, addressing them. All the tariffs are doing is trying to, as I think you said in the piece, blackmail or leverage other countries into addressing these emergencies. Like, it's not the EU's job to sort out America's deficit. It's not China's job to sort out America's opioid problem, which is a problem not because of the flow of fentanyl into America, but because people are in parts of the country are so deeply impoverished and desperate and hopeless. But going back to the courts, so I think the court here did its job. And as you say, the optics for Trump really, really, really suit him in his trying to rebalance the power of the executive against the legislative and judiciary branches of government. But I mean, I think I feel sorry when the court gets involved for another reason. As you say, this administrative treatment of these political issues. And one of the reasons that kind of worries me is that because the state, and I'm not a fan of the liberal state. There's lots of things that I would like to see go. I mean, personally, not really a fan of states at all, actually. But leaving that aside, I'm not a fan of it, and I think there are ways in which it needs to change in order to serve the people who live in the country better than it does, rather than, for example, corporations or the rich. But there's a way in which that anger is diverted by populists to the structure of the state in the wrong kind of way. And sometimes I think actually the function of, in order for it to be democratic, and this kind of judicial action or this administrative action is often seen as a dam on democracy, because people have voted for Trump on certain promises, and now suddenly the judiciary is saying he can't fulfill those promises. I sometimes think that the problem there is a democratic problem, because it means that people never get to see what they actually voted for. If Trump was able to carry out this tariff plan, create absolute economic havoc in the US, impoverish people more, other countries would then reorganize their own trade arrangements so as to, block the US out, so it loses its standing on the international stage. I mean, that's terrible for those people who voted in this populist spirit for Trump, and it's also terrible for those people who didn't. But in some way, it's a reminder of how important it is to be serious about your vote, how important it is to be serious about democracy when you have a vote. sometimes I think, it's a pity that the courts, for example, stop the actual will of the people that's been expressed in a ballot from being carried out, so that they can see ultimately what it is that they voted for.
Yeah, I think that contradiction that you outline, or that kind of very surreal thing when, we have kind of these critiques of some of these big institutions, but we see them being gutted out on exactly the wrong principles. It's how I felt during the Brexit vote. I could lay out my critique of the EU for days. There were certain things in the EU that, I thought were pro-corporate, were not sort of hamstrung us from being able to do some of the things that would actually be really good for working people in this country. But the things that I wanted to see dismantled were not like labor rights and like human rights, which is kind of what the Brexit that we got is about. And as for sort of to take it back to the US, I mean, it's almost like you can just see it in such clear vision. I mean, life is probably going to get worse for working class people in the US because the things that they need are not going to be delivered by a Trump presidency. And all throughout these challenges with the courts, Trump has kind of laid the foundations to, at the end of his term, to say, well, I had a plan and it was all going well. And then I got defeated by these liberal judges or by these liberal universities or by whatever. And God knows what he plans to do with the anger that might spark. But yeah, I mean, lawfare is not a substitute for actually going out and doing politics, basically, is what I'm saying. But it has not been a good week, generally, for Donald Trump. First, he found out that people on Wall Street are calling him taco. Trump always chickens out. Then a US federal court ruled that most of his flagship liberation tariffs are illegal and blocked them, making headlines around the world. But it gets worse. Trump's closest tech billionaire ally has officially stepped down from the Trump administration, leaving behind budget-slashing days at Doge. Musk announced he'd be pulling back from the administration months ago, with many speculating it was a response to the financial hit his company Tesla took because of his proximity to Trump. But on his way out, Musk also took a critical turn. Last week, the US House of Representatives narrowly passed what Trump calls his, quote, big, beautiful bill. It includes multi-trillion-dollar tax breaks, as well as a promise to increase defense spending. And it's the spending that Musk objected to on a Sunday morning news show.
So, I was disappointed to see the massive spending bill, frankly, which increases the budget deficit, doesn't decrease it, and undermines the work that the Doge team is doing.
I actually thought that when this big, beautiful bill came along. I mean, everything he's done on Doge gets wiped out in the first year.
I think a bill can be big or it can be beautiful, but I don't know if it can be both. My personal opinion.
In a news briefing yesterday, Trump was asked about those comments.
President Elon Musk, in a television interview, criticized the one big, beautiful bill, saying he was disappointed it didn't cut enough, essentially, that it undercut the Doge efforts. What's your reaction to that?
Well, the reaction's a lot of things. Number one, we have to get a lot of votes. We can't be cutting. We need to get a lot of support, and we have a lot of support. We had to get it through the House. The House was. We have no Democrats. If it's up to the Democrats, they'll take the 65% increase. If that doesn't get approved, this country is going to have a 65% increase in taxes and lots of other problems, big problems, almost bigger than that. But we'll have a 65% increase as opposed to the largest tax cut in the history of our country. We will be negotiating that bill, and I'm not happy about certain aspects of it, but I'm thrilled by other aspects of it. That's the way they go. It's very big. It's the big, beautiful bill.
Stephen, what do you make of the latest in the will they, won't they saga between Trump and Musk?
Oh, I think it's over. I think Elon Musk is very relieved that it's over. Probably wants to get back to Tesla and SpaceX, salvage Tesla if he can, make good with the board, who apparently are extremely unhappy. I think what's so interesting about that clip, those two clips for me, is actually it shows really, in a very bare way, two different conceptions of power. So on the one hand, you've got Musk saying, I'm really disappointed with this bill because it had concessions in it, and we should have pushed for a bill that had no concessions, so just tax cuts. And then you've got like Trump, who is a very successful politician, whatever else you think of him, understanding that the way that you get a bill through is by making concessions, is by negotiating, and they got it through, the House, his big beautiful bill, and Musk, this kind of princeling of industry, just doesn't understand that there are such things as concessions to be made politically. It's for him, it's got sort of Ayn Randian matter of will and power alone. But the other thing I find interesting about this argument between them about the spending, it's not like it's welfare spending, right? It's defense spending, and I think it's another way that shows how ill-suited Musk is to the two-party political system that exists in the States, because defense spending is a kind of spending that Republicans love, and they always want to up it. They always want to make it bigger. So it's no surprise that bill passed through the House. You've got tax cuts and bombs. Republicans love nothing more, and it's so strange that Elon Musk, didn't get that memo.
Yeah, I think I just don't think that it really was anything to do with the bill. I think he just used it because, like you said, I just instinctively don't think that Musk would oppose defense spending. It's the only kind of spending that someone like Musk would support. Obviously, I'm not in his head, thank God. But I don't think it is an ideological thing. I think he was looking for a way out because maybe he got bored and he wanted to go back to his Mars stuff. And he just was looking for an exit, and he found one. So I don't really think it's anything to do with principle, as it rarely is with these kind of guys. The Israeli government has announced that the country will be expanding. What else is new, you might ask? Well, this time they're being pretty explicit about why. The government has said it will establish 22 new settlements in the West Bank, including by legalizing outposts built without government approval. And it's doing so to deliberately block the formation of a Palestinian state. The decision followed a secret vote by the Security Cabinet of Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's government. Announcing the decision, Israel's Ministry of Defense released this statement. The new settlements are all placed within a long-term strategic vision whose goal is to strengthen the Israeli hold on the territory, to avoid the establishment of a Palestinian state, and to create the basis for future development of settlements in the coming decades. So much for that two-state solution that the world keeps blaming the Palestinians for not taking. The motion was apparently put forward by Israel's far-right finance minister, Bezalel Smotrich, himself a settler. He posted this online. We did not take foreign land, but the inheritance of our fathers. 58 years since the liberation of Judea and Samaria, a once-in-a-generation decision. We led a historic decision for settlement, 22 new settlements in Judea and Samaria, the renewal of settlement in northern Samaria, and the strengthening of the eastern boulevard of the State of Israel, the defensive wall of the State of Israel. This is a great day for settlement and an important day for the State of Israel. Through hard work and tenacious leadership, we have succeeded in creating a profound strategic change, returning the State of Israel to a path of construction, Zionism, and vision. Settlement in the land of our ancestors is the protective wall of the State of Israel. Today, we have taken a huge step to strengthen it. The next step, sovereignty. Some of the new settlements will be along the West Bank border with Jordan, while others will be along the highway connecting Jerusalem and Tel Aviv. It's just another in the constant grabbing of land from Palestinians by Israelis. This map shows how little of the West Bank remains under Palestinian control. Just the areas in yellow, where darker yellow shows more built-up towns and cities. But the purple is all Israeli occupation and settlement, with those settlements and their municipal boundaries also gradually growing larger. And some of those settlements are hardly settlements at all, but lush, cultivated, luxury residential areas. Ma'ale Adumim is an urban Israeli settlement and city council firmly in Palestinian territory, 4 miles east of Jerusalem. It boasts palm trees and well-watered lawns, a population of 40,000 Israelis, and at least 21 schools and 80 kindergartens. There's also an amusement park. And let's not forget the stunning views over the lands constantly being stolen from Palestinians. You know, there's often a distinction that people try to make between, we saw it when David Cameron and then David Lammy were talking about taking action against extreme West Bank settlers. And, their way of saying, we're doing something to take the Israelis to task was saying, we're going to restrict visas on extreme West Bank settlers. And the point that we've always made on this show is that those extreme West Bank settlers are an extension of the Israeli state. They are backed by the violence of the Israeli state. Their infrastructure is often provided by the Israeli state. So even in the cases when it's not just these like rogue settlers that are just acting extra, outside of the realms of state power, they are able to do this because they know they will be backed by state power. And this is basically solidifies that which we have always said, which is that the Israeli state and these so-called extremist West Bank settlers have a symbiotic relationship, a mutually reinforcing relationship. Now, as I said, the Israeli government is authorizing some new settlements, but it's also legalizing a number of settlements that were founded without permission. And that reminded me of this scene from Louis Theroux's recent BBC documentary. Here he is talking to the so-called godmother of settlerhood, Daniela Weiss.
So the idea is to force the government by putting people, starts with small settlements, then they get bigger, then they get recognized by the State of Israel, and basically creating a new demographic reality.
We do not force a government. We do for governments what they cannot do for themselves. Even if you take Netanyahu now, he is very happy with what we do here and also about our plans to build Jewish communities in Gaza. He's happy about it, but he cannot say it. He says the opposite. It's not realistic. Good! We will make it realistic. It's not forcing the government, it's helping the government. It's step number one in politics. You don't force the government, you give the government the courage, the ability, the public support, the political support. I think you understand what I said, even if you disagree.
Yeah, she basically said what I just said. Yes, Netanyahu can't outwardly, or the Israeli state can't outwardly promote this, but they allow it to happen in the knowledge that when it does happen and the dust has settled quite literally on these settlements, they'll be able to offer tacit support. That's how it works. She literally told us that that's how it works. And weeks later, we're watching it happen live. Last year, Netanyahu's government approved the largest seizure of land in the occupied West Bank in more than 3 decades. The settler watchdog, Peace Now, declared it, quote, the largest single appropriation approved since the 1993 Oslo Accords. These new authorizations now add to that grim record. More settlers also, of course, mean more violence for Palestinians. Just 2 weeks ago, Palestinian human rights activist Issa Amra posted this video taken outside his home in Hebron. In case you're listening to the podcast, that was a group of Israeli settler youths outside of Amra's house, throwing stones, shouting and threatening him after they'd set a large fire in his garden. And of course, they were protected by Israeli soldiers. Responding to the decision, a Hamas spokesperson told Al Jazeera this. The announcement of the building of 22 new settlements in the West Bank is part of the war led by Netanyahu against the Palestinian people. A spokesperson for Israeli human rights group B'Tselem said this. Israel continues to promote Jewish supremacy through the theft of Palestinian land and the ethnic cleansing of the West Bank. The Israeli government is openly and blatantly working to destroy the Palestinian people and any chances for a normal future for the people living between the Jordan River and the sea. The international community is enabling Israel's crimes by standing aside while millions of Palestinians are subjected to this racist and brutal regime of the Israeli government. Stephen, that Daniela Weiss clip, when she says, "We do what the government cannot do," with like a kind of wink and a nudge. What do you make of that?
Well, I think it just gives excellent political analysis of her function within this settler state, basically. And it is a settler state. We're not just talking about the West Bank, we're talking about all of it. They sort of are pioneers, you might say. They sort of go onto the frontier of Israel into the West Bank. They set up camps. Those camps then get in bed. They need protection then because often they will, be violent themselves towards Palestinians, and then Palestinians will, quite naturally feel angry in return, and then the military has to get involved. Suddenly the state structure is in place where now this is kind of annexed. You've got soldiers there, you've got Israeli citizens there, and given enough time and the right conditions, and suddenly the state will say, yes, these are now authorized settlements. They are part of our strategy for annexing the whole of the West Bank, and of course for putting an end to any possibility of a Palestinian state. And they were really clear about that in their announcement, that this is a strategic step to prevent the creation of a Palestinian state. So Daniela Weiss has excellent political instincts, and she knows exactly what her function is and what the function of settlers are. And when you showed that map, Dalia, just showing how purple that territory, which was supposed to be all yellow, has become, just how far the encroachment has gone, and what smaller and smaller spaces Palestinians in the West Bank are pressed. And even now, in Jenin, that even there, 40,000 or so have been displaced since earlier this year. You imagine like that small pressurizing of, your people into this tinier and tinier patches, disconnected patches as well, by the way, disconnected patches of lands, as well as pressured into a smaller areas in Gaza. And it just amazes me that people sometimes don't seem to be able to understand why they take up arms against Israelis, why they form armed resistance groups, because there is something that they're really, really resisting. They're really resisting the loss of not just their land and their territory, but the very idea of them as a people. And I don't believe for a minute that any one of us or any one of our viewers, if they were in that sort of situation, wouldn't themselves take up arms.
It's been very clear for many decades that the Israelis obviously have no intentions of a Palestinian state ever being viable. It's never been realistic in the current kind of way that power is organized. But now we have like members of the government saying we are actively taking action to make sure that a Palestinian state will never come into being. We had, I'm pretty sure that Tzipi Hotelevi said the same thing. The Israeli ambassador to Britain said, when she was asked, like, do you believe that Palestinians should have a state? And she was like, how can there be how can you say that there can be a Palestinian state? So my question is, how come the question of do you believe that Palestine has a right to exist as a state is never asked, even though institutions, states with overwhelming levels of militaristic and political and financial power have made it their business to ensure that a Palestinian state never exists. The United States is deeply concerned about Britain. Is it because of our spiraling cost of living crisis, the fact that companies are polluting our waters with sewage? No. The US is apparently deeply concerned that there is a free speech crisis in Britain. The Trump administration has once again hit out at Britain and Europe more broadly, this time over the case of Lucy Connolly, the wife of a Conservative councillor who was jailed for 31 months after she posted online encouraging rioters to burn down asylum seeker hotels during racist riots last summer. According to The Telegraph, the White House have stated they are monitoring Connolly's case as a free speech violation. A spokesman for the State Department told The Telegraph this. We can confirm that we are monitoring this matter. The United States supports freedom of expression at home and abroad and remains concerned about infringements on freedom of expression. Now, it's not quite clear what they mean by monitoring, but we do know that this has been a long bubbling culture war between Trump's America and Europe. Secretary of State Marco Rubio announced yesterday he will be restricting the visas of foreign officials who he views as censoring what Americans say online. This includes foreign officials who lobby American tech platforms like X to adopt global content moderation policies. In March of this year, Donald Trump sent a team of 5 US State Department officials to the UK to interview campaigners who believed their freedom of speech had been threatened and to feed back their findings to the White House. This included meeting with 5 anti-abortion activists who had been arrested for protesting outside abortion clinics across Britain. Shortly after the visit, the topic came up during trade talks between Starmer, Trump, and J.D. Vance.
Look, I said what I said, which is that we do have, of course, a special relationship with our friends in the UK and also with some of our European allies. But we also know that there have been infringements on free speech that actually affect not just the British. Of course, what the British do in their own country is up to them, but also affect American technology companies and, by extension, American citizens. So that is something that we'll talk about today at lunch.
We've had free speech for a very, very long time in the United Kingdom, and it will last for a very, very long time. Well, no, I mean, certainly we wouldn't want to reach across US citizens, and we don't, and that's absolutely right. But in relation to free speech in the UK, I'm very proud of our history there.
And more recently, a Telegraph journalist confirmed what she described as the MAGA obsession with free speech in the UK.
I actually would have to push back a little bit on what you've said. I think Americans are really concerned about free speech around the world, particularly when it comes to Britain. They're really obsessed with it.
Well, some Americans.
Some Americans, but I would say particularly MAGA, related Americans. When I was out there for inauguration, one of the first things people would say to me when they heard my accent was, I'm so sorry, like Britain's devolved into a police state.
But this
I
is
was like, well,
nonsense,
look,
right?
okay, that's a little bit of an exaggeration, or a big exaggeration. But they have a point in terms that America has more encoded liberal speech values than we do. We do not have free speech encoded in law. America does. That is a real difference, regardless of politics. Always been the case, but now they can see things like the Lucy Connolly case, they see all these stories on social media coming out, and they get a perception that, okay, the UK is not a liberal country anymore. Thank goodness we are.
So there's a growing impression in the US that the UK has become a police state. Now, it goes without saying, the great irony here is that this is coming from an administration that has been abducting students off the street for writing op-eds in which they criticize the state of Israel. Rumeysa Öztürk, a Turkish Tufts student, was famously arrested by 6 masked plainclothes ICE agents and bundled into an unmarked car after she wrote an article calling on her university to cut ties with Israel due to the, quote, plausible genocide it is committing in Gaza. Rumeysa, of course, is not the only one. Palestinian student and green card holder Mohsen Mahdawi was also handcuffed and forced into an unmarked vehicle by masked, hooded immigration officers for his participation in pro-Palestinian protests at Columbia University. Mahmoud Khalil, a US permanent resident of Palestinian descent, remains in detention to this day after he too was taken from his Columbia University residential building. Mamadou Tal, a Cornell University student and dual citizen of the UK and Gambia, was asked to surrender by US immigration officials and told his student visa was being revoked after participating in pro-Palestinian protests. Mamadou tweeted this in response to Rubio's announcement that he will be cracking down on foreign officials seen to be censoring American free speech. So if you look at that tweet, that's a tweet from Secretary Marco Rubio, where he's announcing his new visa restriction policy that will apply to foreign officials who are complicit in censoring Americans. And Mamadou replies there with, "You sent ICE agents to my home because of free speech activity." And not only is the state going after individual students, it has now escalated its crackdown on speech to universities as a whole. the president is currently threatening to cancel up to $100 million of funding for Harvard University in order to pressure the Ivy League into, quote, behaving themselves. The administration has already frozen $2.5 billion in federal grants to the university and tried to revoke its ability to enroll international students. One of the accusations being leveled at Harvard is that they aren't doing enough to crack down on troublemakers.
Jewish students protesting on campus yesterday, they said they don't want you making these huge cuts, cutting off student visas to Harvard in their name, because they feel
Harvard
like
has to show us.
target.
Okay, Harvard has to show us their lists. They have foreign students. About 31% of their students are foreign-based, almost 31%. We want to know where those students come. Are they troublemakers? What countries do they come? And we're not going to, if somebody is coming from a certain country and they're 100% fine, which I hope most of them are, but many of them won't be, you're going to see some very radical people. They're taking people from areas of the world that are very radicalized, and we don't want them making trouble in our country. So I saw yesterday that in the middle of the UK, there was a nice young man. He wants to go back to school at Harvard, and he looked good to me, but I want to check his past. But we want to be able to see why, these countries aren't helping us. They're not investing in Harvard and we are. So why would 31%, why would a number so big? I think, number one, I think they should have a cap of maybe around 15%, not 31%. We have people want to go to Harvard and other schools. They can't get in because we have foreign students there. But I want to make sure that the foreign students are people that can love our country. We don't want to see shopping centers exploding. We don't want to see the kind of riots that you had. And I'll tell you what, many of those students didn't go anywhere. Many of those students were troublemakers caused by the radical left.
So combined with the targeted arrests of pro-Palestinian students in Colombia, the implication there is that Trump wants Harvard to collaborate with his crackdown on students who dissent from the status quo position on Israel. Stephen, is there a free speech crisis in the UK?
There's no free speech crisis in the UK, obviously not. But there is definitely a growing perception of one amongst some people in the UK. And that's a perception that, completely unsurprisingly, is being fanned by a right-wing populist government in the US in order to support the possibility of another right-wing populist government in the UK. And that's predictable. That's kind of how right-wing populism works, is that it finds a channel for people's anger, and I'll get to the source of that anger in a second. It finds a channel for people's anger that traditional centrist type political parties or governments aren't really able to deal with, and then promises to do it themselves. And part of the reason that Labour isn't able to deal with the idea that we don't have free speech in this country is because we do have pretty free speech in this country. I mean, I think some mistakes have been made. I think, and I don't think this is a Labour mistake. This is just a kind of prosecutory mistake. I don't think Lucy Connolly should be in jail. Certainly, she shouldn't be in jail for anything like that length of time. What's she going to do? She's just going to sit there for 31 months. It'll probably be reduced, or she'll be out much earlier. But every day she spends in there, she's sort of a growing martyr to the idea that we don't have free speech in this country. So, yeah, this perception of the lack of free speech is only growing. And I think what's really striking is the inability of the Labour government, but also of the Tory government, to deal with this idea. So, sort of what's going on here? Well, you have some kind of underpinning of anger. That anger is being fanned in a certain direction by right-wing agitators and some right-wing populist figures towards immigrants. That anger is then expressed, and because it's violently expressed, it's then clamped down on by the state. That clamping down, or the sense of it being clamping down, only increases the sense of anger, and the state's ill-equipped to deal with that anger and its source in two ways. One is that Labour and the Tories are both so committed to a certain kind of economic understanding that addressing that anger would mean overturning. So that anger is really the anger of a state no longer working for the people that live in it. It's the anger of, as Aaron will often say, anger at people's town centres falling apart, at services not working, at opportunities drifting away, at meaningful work vanishing from our towns and our regions. And the state is completely ill-equipped to deal with it because the economic structure of the state is now so tied to its real masters, which is capital and corporate capital, that it can't disentangle itself from them. And if it were to try to do it, in one big go, there would be like an economic fallout that very few politicians would be able to weather. So both the Tories and Labour, just unable to address this problem. Reform, in some of its moments, has a kind of sense of addressing that problem. It knows some people can see that's what the problem is. It has to find a broad coalition of people who hate immigrants on one side, but also a lot more people will need to vote for reform for them to form a government. And those will be the ones who, have maybe a better sense of like the source of this anger being economic in the first place. So he's got to make those kinds of gestures towards that understanding. But he also probably won't be able to do it. And it's interesting today, Keir Starmer was talking about Farage and saying, his economics will lead to another Truss moment. That's a kind of bogeyman that's been used for far too long by Labour. But he's also not wrong. Farage will be just as tied to corporate capital as our current to servicing corporate capital as our current main parties are. So that's one problem, is that nobody has the courage or the vision to tackle really, years, decades of economic mismanagement. But the other one is that because they know that they can't tackle this problem, both Labour and the Tories have flirted with the direction in which anger is pushed. So both Labour and the Tories have flirted with immigrations being the source of the problem. Starmer swinging right after the local elections, dog whistling Enoch Powell. And the Tories are now flirting with the free speech issue in a way that Labour isn't yet. But it may well get there. It's very hard to, if you're party of government, be, we don't have free speech when you're the party of government. So that's probably not something that they'll be able to do. But what really needs to be tackled is this anger. And once the anger, once people understand the kind of changes that politics can actually make for their lives, if there's someone trustworthy doing it, if there's someone with vision doing it, then that's what's really needed by everybody. And at the moment, what we have are two lame parties in the centre and a really cynical one on the right, who's not going to be able to do any of the things it says it's going to do to deal with that really deep-seated source of the problem, which is economic despair.
Yeah, I mean, it has absolutely no desire to. I mean, look, on the kind of free speech question, I think it's really obvious that this is a distraction from the material issues that are really impacting people. And let's kind of separate two things here. There's the kind of Lucy Connolly case, the question of the UK. I mean, look, yes, the UK does not have a free speech amendment in the way that the US does. You can agree with that or disagree with that, but the fact is it doesn't. And, there's a great irony in the fact that a US administration that's constantly banging on about, its sovereignty is using its power to bully the rest of the world into adopting its way of being. I mean, I also don't agree that Lucy Connolly should be in prison for a tweet, for a social media post. That's partly rooted in the fact that it's not because I don't think that what she did was really horrible, but because I don't really think that prison is a solution for most social problems. But when it comes to the kind of the broader free speech thing, and particularly what's happening in the US, and also piggybacking off some of the stuff you've said, Stephen, about the ways in which this has been used in order to divert people's very valid sense of dispossession and lack of power over their lives. For years now, we have been told that woke is the threat to free speech. Now, obviously, woke is a very loose term. It doesn't really mean anything consistent, but the broad thing that is being gestured towards there is this idea that people are saying, I'm getting criticized or I'm getting cancelled for saying the quote unquote wrong thing or the politically incorrect thing. And Reform and the far right have very craftily tied that sense of I'm being persecuted, I'm losing power, I'm being dispossessed, I can't do or say anything. They've connected that general feeling that people have, partly because the social contract is declining, partly because people's autonomy and independence, which is so tied to your material status, is being eroded. And they have tied it into this sort of general bogeyman of the woke villain. But it obviously goes without saying that, first of all, very few people have actually been well and truly cancelled for saying something that's racist or misogynistic. There are very, very few cases of that actually happening. But if we talk about the Free Speech Amendment in the US, the Free Speech Amendment does not actually protect you from public backlash. The Free Speech Amendment is not even meant to protect you from losing your job because you hold particular opinions. The Free Speech Amendment is there to protect you from being persecuted by the government for holding or expressing particular views. In other words, it is there precisely to protect people from what we are seeing the US administration do to those international students, to protect people from being abducted off the street by masked ICE agents or masked law enforcement officers and bundled into unmarked vans because they wrote an op-ed saying maybe our university should cut ties with a state that the ICJ is saying is plausibly committing genocide in Gaza. That is actually what the Free Speech Amendment is supposed to protect you from. But they've twisted it into this idea that free speech is about that the Free Speech Amendment is about protecting people who want to air heinous or objectionable or things that people generally don't want to hear, air their views without any kind of dissent or public backlash or criticism, when really, to me, you can't really control the way that society responds to something that someone says, particularly if that person, is in a position of relative cultural power. But what you can do is put up protections against state persecution. And that is the thing that is crumbling before our very eyes. That is the thing that is being eroded. And somehow they have managed to do it within the package of defending free speech. That's what I find to be a sleight of hand that is truly, unfortunately, quite impressive. So yeah, as is often the case, this isn't actually about protecting the rights of free speech as they were originally encoded in the Constitution. Free speech, to me, often seems to be evoked as the excuse to, when you want to make an argument or you want to say something that you can't defend on its own grounds, you just have to use free speech in order to attach it to some kind of like high-minded abstract principle that, I must be able to say this really racist thing in public with no backlash because it's this honorable, broader principle of free speech, rather than actually having to defend what you're saying on its own grounds. And, like I said, I don't think that people should be put in prison. I think Lucy Connolly being in prison for 31 months is only going to make the problem worse. I think if you really want to take action against people saying things like what Lucy Connolly said online, what you want to do is stop fanning the flames of a far-right populism that demonizes migrants. So really the free speech argument is really, it's obfuscating and it's tangling the real issues into a knot that it's very, very difficult to untie. But I think, Stephen, you did a really good job of trying to untie it there. Britain is broken, but don't worry. Shadow Secretary of State Robert Jenrick is on the case. Who could he possibly be going after, you ask? Is it the oil and gas executives making record profits whilst gouging our energy bills and destroying the planet? Or maybe it's the multi-billionaire tax avoiders squirreling their wealth away in offshore bank accounts? No? Well, surely it's the property developers turning high-rise flats into fire traps with cheap, flammable cladding. Not them either, you say? Well, then who is it? Who are the villains Robert Jenrick is bravely trying to protect us from?
Excuse me, do you think it's all right not to pay? Seriously, why do you go back through the barrier and pay? Do you want to go back and pay like everybody else? Do you think it's all right not to pay? Why don't you go back and pay? You can say off as much as you want, but everyone else has to pay. You're carrying a knife, you say? Nearly 1 in 25 people using London's public transport aren't paying for it. So there's 8 officers down there, but 1 minute away, that gate's wide open. It's also just annoying watching so many people break the law and get away with it.
Or at least most of the time.
Right, should we go over here to these guys here? Excuse me, gents.
Hello.
You're on camera, mate, you're bang to rights.
Just step to the side and...
All right, thanks very much, guys. It's the same with bike theft, phone theft, tool theft, shoplifting, drugs in town centres, weird Turkish barber shops. It's all chipping away at society. The state needs to reassert itself and go after lawbreakers.
Sorry. Yes, that was the bizarre video that Robert Jenrick posted today on X, formerly known as Twitter, in which he films himself confronting people dodging fares on the tube. So you could all sleep peacefully tonight, guys, because Jenrick's on the case. But in all seriousness, according to TfL, 3.4% of passengers didn't pay fares between April and December last year, which is actually down from the year before. Now, in a perfect world, would everyone pay their fair share? Sure. But 3.4% doesn't really seem like the sharp edge of a collapsing society to me. Now, Jenrick, of course, doesn't agree with me. Here he is on Times Radio.
And it feels to me it's also something bigger than just fare dodging. That's one example, whether it's graffiti, whether it's people on public transport who are playing loud music instead of wearing headphones, annoying everyone, trying to dominate the space. But there are numerous examples which suggest that the public realm, the places that we all share as society, are fraying right now. In fact, are being shredded.
I understand.
And they want to see the authorities, whoever they might be in that setting, step up and take action.
What's happened in our society that's made this possible, acceptable? Whose failure is it? Because is it just about a failure of policing, or has something gone awry in people's approach to society?
Look, I subscribe to the broken windows theory of crime, where if you allow small things to happen with impunity, then that takes hold. You see more of that happening, and then those individuals feel as if they have license to do ever more serious offences. You've seen that, I think, in our country. You've certainly seen it in other cities around the world, and it worries me. So if you have the authorities turning a blind eye to something that seems innocuous or minor, like fare dodging, then more and more people will do it because they think they'll be able to get away with it. And then perhaps some of those people will do something more serious, like graffiti, or will do shoplifting, or that it will keep on spiralling. And I certainly see it in the community that I represent, very different from London, a small town in North Nottinghamshire. But there is now a sense that many people feel that they don't feel safe walking into the town centre of a market town on a Friday night, and that worries me a lot. And that has happened in recent years. And if the authorities don't step up and take action and enforce the rules, then I think this will just keep growing.
So Jenrick there arguing basically that fare dodging on the tube is a gateway drug to more serious crimes like graffiti and shoplifting. Now, I'll defend London's graffiti culture to the hilt, but Jenrick is identifying there that there's a general sense of the public realm being shredded. And as a lifelong Londoner, I don't entirely disagree with him. However, can I gently suggest that the reason behind that isn't fare dodgers or graffiti? Perhaps it's got something to do with the fact that austerity, which Jenrick's party enforced on us, completely shredded the public spaces that bound us together. It closed community centres, youth centres, libraries, not to mention the spiralling cost of rent, which has sucked the life out of our high streets, displacing locally owned cafes and restaurants in favour of the same 4 or 5 corporations. And of course, the removal of social safety nets and spiralling costs of living, which has inevitably pushed people into things like shoplifting. According to the British Retail Consortium, do you know what the 3rd most shoplifted item in the UK was last year? Baby formula. A study of 2,500 adults in 2022 found that 70% of people who stole an item when using a self-service checkout did so because of the cost of living crisis. So with all its beauty, are cities like London becoming more difficult places to live? Sure. But as is so often the case, I would argue that people like Jenrick are confusing symptom with cause, perhaps because, more often than not, their politics are themselves the very cause of the problem. Stephen, why are Conservatives so scared of London?
Because London hates them. They hate them in London. I don't know. I mean, like, that video is hilarious. I mean, you've got this idea of Sadiq Khan's London, and there's, Captain Underpants hanging around in a beautiful, glittering, efficient tube station, a monument to modernity and efficiency and an operating cityscape. And yet he's there hanging out all day, waiting to bother the odd person who pushes through the gates without paying. I mean, there's not a lot to say about this. This is a guy who wants to be prime minister. He wants to be leader of the Tory party. I mean, actually, he's pretty suited to the Tory party in its current state. It's falling apart, useless. It's this kind of, I don't know, back to basics idea that's he referenced broken windows there, one of the worst policies of the 1990s. This idea that small infringements like dodging your fare are going to lead to greater criminal actions. There's a very little basis for it, but what there is a good basis for is, as you pointed out, and I can't really say much more than you said already, Dalia, is that when people are impoverished, when people don't feel like they have prospects, when they feel that there's no point in respecting anything because nothing respects you, then of course they're going to feel that the social contract has been broken. So why should they uphold their side of the bargain? Just, kind of rational. So yeah, there's something pretty stupid about an MP hanging around, like I say, a beautiful, efficient, clean tube station, trying to score petty points over fare dodging, when he actually has the power to legislate. He actually had the power, for his party anyway, for a decade and a half to legislate, to transform things economically, and they didn't want to do it. So yeah, Jenrick should put the film camera away, shut up, and piss off.
Well put. I mean, I always find it really funny when conservative men are always like, I'm a big macho man and I'm taking on the criminals. And it's like, to me, you just seem to wake up every morning scared shitless. Like, oh my God, what if I see a drag queen or a graffito? The decline of Western civilization is upon me. And it's like, you need to relax, boy. It's fine. Anyway, thanks for joining me, Stephen. Had a lovely show with you today.
Yeah, very nice to be here. Thank you very much, Dalia.
And thank you, everyone, for joining us tonight. Make sure you come back tomorrow, as always, for another live stream from 6 p.m. For now, you've been watching Novara Media. Good night.